The Boston and Maine Railroad played host to a number of important junctions, locations where railroad lines met or crossed each other. Many of these were meeting places of independent railroad lines or companies, which headed off in different directions. As the Boston and Maine Railroad absorbed many of these companies throughout the latter half of the 19th century, these junctions became the meeting point of Boston and Maine lines. Ask any Boston and Maine enthusiast and they'll rattle off the names of some of these junction points. White River Junction, Sterling Junction, West Concord, Rotterdam Junction, South Sudbury, Whitefield, Coos Junction, and of course, Rockingham Junction.
Rockingham Junction may be the popular name, but technically, to most on the railroad, it was just Rockingham. Rockingham is located within the town of Newfields, New Hampshire, just feet from the border with Newmarket. The junction here was between the Portsmouth and Concord Railroad, completed in August 1852, which later became the Portsmouth branch of the Boston and Maine, and the Western Route Main Line of the B&M. A station sprung up at the junction with a freight house, water facilities, a turntable, a large restaurant, and connection tracks between the Portsmouth and Concord and the Western Route Main Line. As we mentioned, the Portsmouth and Concord became a Boston and Maine property. It was later renamed the Concord and Portsmouth and became part of the Concord and Montreal in 1889, and eventually part of the Boston and Maine in 1895, when the B&M absorbed the Concord and Montreal.
With freight and passenger traffic on both the Western Route Main Line and the Portsmouth branch, Rockingham stayed an important junction spot for decades. Signaling was important here, as was the ritual of trains coming and going on schedule. In an article from our magazine, the B&M Bulletin, in 1993, Charles Niles Jr. recounted some of these rituals.
In those days, the B&M referred to the junction as simply Rockingham, although the ticket dater always imprinted Rockingham Junction on the tickets that were sold there. It is interesting to recollect the daily ritual which occurred each morning. At 8:38, morning train 3601 from Portsmouth arrived. It crossed the double-track Western Route Main Line, passed the station platform, and stopped just north of the spur switch. The train was then backed onto the spur connection with the Western Route. This procedure was provided for in the timetable by the following notation. Number 3601 is superior to number 3600 Portsmouth to north switch of passing siding Rockingham, and will set off on spur track north of station for number 3600. Train 3601 almost always consisted of two cars, the first of which was an 1180 series gas-electric motor with baggage and passenger compartments. Attached to the motor was a trailer car of the 1080 series. This trailer consisted of another compartment with an RPO Railway Post Office section in the rear. As soon as 3601 was safely backed onto the spur, 3600 would haul down, making its arrival from Manchester at 8:42 a.m. This train had a similar consist and always held the main track on the Portsmouth branch while at Rockingham. At the junction, two baggagemen transferred mail, railway express, and baggage from the two branch trains to the two main line trains. As stated previously, main line train number 132 arrived at 8:45 and departed at 8:50. During that 5-minute interval, a lot of mail and express was unloaded for the branch trains. Following all this, all westbound traffic was loaded on. Transferring of passengers had to be done while dodging baggage trucks everywhere. During the fall of 1951, while employed by the Boston and Maine, I worked one of these positions. They were wild for about 40 minutes twice daily. On June 8, 1952, a fan trip of the railroad enthusiasts from Boston bound for Waterville, Maine, stopped here. While watering the locomotive at Rockingham, crews were unable to shut off the standpipe, leading to a washout at the junction and a wrecked freight train. This forced the excursion to return to Boston via the Eastern Route Main Line from North Berwick to Portsmouth and on to Newburyport and eventually Boston. Another interesting chapter in Rockingham's history came later in 1971, when film crews descended on the area for the shooting of A Separate Peace, a film adaptation of John Knowles' World War II coming-of-age story set in New Hampshire. Due to the period of the film, a steam locomotive was required. Canadian National 060 number 7470 owned at that point by Dwight Smith and outlined for the yet-to-open Conway Scenic Railroad, was secured. 7470 was brought down from Rigby Yard in Portland, Maine, painted up in Boston and Maine livery, and coupled to similarly painted coaches from the Maine Central's work train. The movie train was pushed by a Boston and Maine GP9 on the rear because the steamer was not yet active, although smoke and sound effects helped create the illusion. The western connection track with the Portsmouth branch was used for this to shoot the scene, where students from the film's prep school helped clear snow from the tracks for a troop train.
The Portsmouth branch of the B&M became less utilized as the years went on. By the mid-1970s, most local freights from Concord and Manchester did not cross at Rockingham Junction and only ran as far as Epping, although occasional high and wide movements did run to Rockingham or Portsmouth. In 1982, the branch was abandoned from East Manchester to Rockingham, and the rails were removed between 1984 and 1985. Despite the loss of the line to Manchester, the Portsmouth branch remained in service from Rockingham to Portsmouth and still sees frequent use today. Bits of the junction still remain, including the connection track here from the Western Route main line to the line west to Manchester. This track was last used in the late 1990s or early 2000s to store damaged freight cars, and today still lies in the woods at Rockingham. The old freight house, which stood on the main line right next to the junction for many years, was demolished in the mid-2000s. The Rockingham station was moved from its original location here at the junction in January and February of 2024, and now stands not far from its original spot. The plans of the owner are to utilize it as a bike shop and rest location for those utilizing the Rockingham Rail Trail, which of course was once the Portsmouth branch of the Boston and Maine Railroad.